Hey, I'm Jade, and today I'm going to talk to you about checking compulsions in OCD, peer-to-peer, how I manage them, my experience with them, and some tips to help you deal with them, hopefully eventually send them packing. So the first thing to say is that checking compulsions can come in lots of forms and they can be super sneaky. So some examples of checking compulsions in OCD could be the obvious ones, such as checking the locks multiple times, checking that we've turned off hair appliances, checking anything to do with the safety of our home or making sure that our loved ones are safe. That can be a really common one. We can also find ourselves checking things like when we're out and about, looking for triggers. So constantly checking, let's say you're in a restaurant and you first enter and you're checking for signs that this may not be a hygienic restaurant, or that the chefs don't look very clean, or that you are scanning the perimeters of the room to see if there's dirt anywhere, and just really sort of scanning. I would consider scanning a checking compulsion. Also, when you're just out and about in a place where you don't necessarily feel really safe, where a place that you might be thinking, there's often triggers here. So am I safe here? I can't rule out that there would be triggers. So in OCD, we often have what I call safe places. So a lot of people's safe places, their home, because they can control what's in it, what's going on. Whereas if you go to another place, you can often feel unsafe. And so the checking is, let me just make sure that everything in this place is safe and not triggering me so that I can finally relax. And so if you find yourself regularly scanning rooms and checking where you're sitting versus being able to see triggers, that's definitely a checking compulsion. And also checking compulsions can take the form, in my experience, of checking for bodily responses. So for example, if you've got sensory motor OCD, constantly checking, am I feeling that again? And then that brings on the feeling that you don't want to feel. Checking for things like groinal responses. If you're in triggering situations, constantly scanning your body to see if you're feeling unwell anywhere. Like if you've had some kind of feeling in your stomach, constantly checking that, which can lead to OCD often mimicking real health concerns, which can be really scary. So it's really hard when we can't turn off these checking compulsions because they just feel so automatic. And in my case, I've definitely been there. I've lived my life for years on end, a few years ago, where I was just in a constant spiral of checking, whether that be checking for response in my body, checking for feelings, checking for thoughts. Everywhere I went would be like meticulously planned in terms of where I was sitting, which way I was facing, so that I wouldn't be able to see triggers. Literally everywhere I went, I would be checking. And even to the point of things as dramatic as if I was moving house, I would not only look at the photos, I'd be zooming in on the windows to be like, well, am I going to see into other people's houses? Are there traces of triggers in their garden? What clues can I get from Google Earth as to where this building is? Is it in the vicinity of anything that's going to trigger me? What's my street life going to be like? Is it going to be busy? Is it a dead end? And just like super zooming in on things that you wouldn't even think about. And that could be the same with, say, if someone has harm OCD, being really obsessed about, checking where they are. Like if they visit a friend's house, have they got knives on display? If that's something they're uncomfortable with and triggers them. Could we sit in the living room because I don't want to be in the kitchen where I'm going to see more triggering things? Oh, they've got a red painted wall. I'm freaked out by the colour red. And it just, where does it end? And I think what I always think about this type of OCD, where we're checking in order to feel safe, now that I'm a lot better, I think the harshest thing about that is not so much that OCD is ruling our life in a sense, but OCD is stripping out the joy and the spontaneity of life. So if I'm asked to go somewhere, in the past when I was super freaked out and scared by OCD, rather than looking forward to the event and thinking like, oh, where's this day going to take me? How much fun are we going to have today? I was obsessed with, okay, who's going? what's it like there? Am I going to be triggered? What's the, just checking all those details, asking questions to others to gain certainty and clarity so that I knew what I was walking into. And on the way, just thinking, oh, what's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? And then as soon as I got there, checking, scanning, okay, relief, I'm fine. Or, oh my gosh, I'm not. This is the worst thing. Why did I come? And that's just really sad. I think my goal earlier on when I was recovering from OCD was more like get through the day, don't feel constantly terrified, just be able to go through life feeling okay, not in this constant anxiety state. Get through the day is a pretty low bar for life, isn't it? Like, my aim in life is to get through the day. I just think, yes, when you're in like mental torture 24 hours a day, that's like heaven. But once you achieve that, you realize that's not really living either. That's just existing, which is certainly more appealing than terror every minute of the day. But it's definitely not the life vision that I had. And that's why I think that things like avoidance and constant checking compulsions are attractive, because they take us from absolute terror with the uncertainty or with being around the threat or the trigger to a place of, okay, I'm safe and I can enjoy my day now and everything's good and now I'm safe, and you're in your safety zone. The problem with that is that it only grows the fear. So the more we box life in, the more the fear starts to grow. And this happened to me really slowly but steadily over years. Whereas before, at the start of my OCD suffering, so really kicked in about age of 17, probably age 13 actually, it became really overwhelming. And then at 17, it just became like, there's no corner of life that I can even hide in now and escape this. What I found was I boxed myself in because I'd be like, oh, I just avoid that TV show because that has something I don't like watching, or I'll avoid a scenario that's going to be triggering. But then, yeah, it seeped into like what TV shows I was watching, so I censored that. Then it was like a newspaper headline, even if I just glanced at it on the table. Then it became someone mentioning a keyword that linked to my fear that then brought it on. Then it became perhaps a colour would remind me of the theme. So what happened was, the more I avoided and the more I checked for stuff, the more I saw. So if you go into a room and go, am I safe? You start to scan the pictures in the room, the wording in the room, the colour of the room, the colour of what people are wearing, the print on the mug that they're drinking from. And it just gets out of control. And that's when I ended up having like a severe breakdown. About the age of 25 was my 24, 25 was my worst breakdown, where it's like, I can't carry on like this. I literally can't get through the day, because it was just boxing me in smaller and smaller and smaller. So then I was just trapped with my head and my thoughts. And it was like the realization of, I can't actually get out of my head. I've avoided everything else, but I can't get out of my head. So that was like a revelation to me when I started to learn about OCD. Now, I wouldn't learn what OCD even was for another 4 years at that point, which is obviously such a shame, because I then had 4 years in an absolute breakdown mode with no idea what was going on, no idea what was wrong with me, and having therapy that was taking the edge off a little bit, but they didn't even know I had OCD. So how do you treat that? And just on the point of ineffective therapy, I had a really lovely therapist at the start of my anxiety awareness, let's call it. So like I said, I went from age 8 feeling there was something different about me, something wrong, and feeling all of the anxiety symptoms around threat of things like war and hurricanes and anything bad happening. I would just have the feeling we all know too well, where all the blood rushes out of your body and you just feel like you're going to collapse or be sick, and the world just feels weird, and you just feel like, get me off, get me out of this place, whatever this place is. And I had that from age 8, and then age 13 I had a memory that then latched really hard and was like, oh my gosh, you're a bad person. And then at 17 it just ramped up another gear, and then I, from 19 to 25, managed to coexist with this, thinking this weird horrible part of my brain, and I'm going to run away from it, and I'm just going to try and live a normal life, but I'm not normal, and one day it's all going to come out that I'm just awful, I'm a terrible person. And then at 25 it was like collapse, like, you can't do this anymore. this is not sustainable. At this point, I was severely underweight. I was not getting through the day. And yeah, so one of the therapists at that point, so I started talking therapy at that point, and one of the therapists said, now bearing in mind they didn't know I had OCD, I was just compulsively talking about my thoughts and worrying about them, and they were like, it's okay, this is normal, intrusive thoughts happen to everyone, they're just thoughts. So this was not CBT therapy for OCD. So I'm not talking badly about that type of therapy, it was talking therapy. But unfortunately, we just delved into the thoughts and just diagnosed them and worked them out and made lists as to whether I was a good person or a bad person and talked about my values. And it was really ineffective because all we were doing was reassuring me. So every week I would go away thinking, oh, it's okay, it's just thoughts, it's not me. And that definitely wasn't going to help. But once the therapist said, and when I was talking about checking compulsions, she said, look, it's okay not to look at something if you're uncomfortable. So just look away and that's fine. Now, that obviously became a compulsion in itself because that's avoidance. Now, she didn't know that. She was giving me the best advice that she had. If I knew I had OCD, I could have sought better treatment. And so that's the real problem here is like you get stuck because you're like, I was like this, if you can relate. I'm not supposed to look to check, but I'm not supposed to avoid by not looking. So I would think, well, what do I do then? Do I look? Okay, don't look. And then you like dying to look. And mine was more about scanning that I was safe. Has a trigger come? Has a trigger gone? Where is everyone placed? What's everyone doing? Can I see something I don't want to see? Are there any clues that I'm in danger? And just constantly in the back of my mind, I could be talking to someone, and at my peripheral vision, I would just see something happen or someone come in, and there was a trigger approaching, and like I would just feel myself going, oh no, and I just feel really ill talking to the person I was talking to, and it would just ruin the day. So what did I do to overcome this? Well, the first thing is that by trying to avoid, like essentially checking is trying to avoid because you're trying to make sure there's nothing there to scare you. I would suggest, and what I did was moving towards these fears. So making it part of my recovery was exposure, was like, how can I be in front of these feared things rather than moving away from them? So if I walked into a restaurant and was compelled to sit facing a wall so I wouldn't have to assess and scan the room, I would say, right, I am facing outward to the restaurant and I'm not going to look away from anything I see. So kind of doing the opposite of what the compulsion is begging you to do and kind of, facing up to that fear. So never doing anything that is as a result of your OCD being scared. So never moving away from a situation or not attending an event based on the fear of what would be there. Also, I worked really hard on going with uncertainty on how often I should look at something, whether I should or shouldn't. And that was really helpful. So it would be like, not because I think sometimes people get advice of like check the locks twice, but no more than that. And it's kind of like that's giving you certainty on what you should be doing. Whereas I would say go with uncertainty. If it was me, if I was in my room thinking, I've got a feeling I didn't lock the doors, I probably just wouldn't check. And that leads me on nicely to making peace with the feared scenario. So that was the element that got me to no longer do the checking, which was, well, what is it I'm deeply afraid of? And working on breaking down that irrational fear. So this is not about like delving into thought content, but like addressing what is in all of these situations and all of these checking compulsions I'm doing, what is it I'm actually fearing underneath all of that, so that I can work on no longer being afraid of that. So for example, if I'm in a restaurant and I'm like, that chef looked like he had a really dirty tea towel and he just lifted the plate with it and now he's put it down and then he's just like wiped his like face. Was that his nose he wiped, or was that, now let me see what he's doing next? And then, okay, the hygiene rating of the restaurant is only 3, and I read a couple of reviews that someone said that their food was not great. Oh no, am I going to get really sick? So working on the fact that I definitely wouldn't want to get food poisoning from being in a restaurant or get really ill. But if it happened, it would have happened to a lot of people in the past. They certainly were able to carry on living. And so making peace with not making peace with it happening, not being like, oh yeah, it's cool if it happens, I don't care, but having the same reaction as someone who doesn't have OCD to that fear. So how did they react? And how did they, like, they might look at someone and be like, they don't look like they're being very diligent with X, Y, or Z, but they wouldn't keep looking, obsess over it. So it's about having that healthy response to life situations rather than an obsessive response. And that's always been my goal with OCD recovery. And that's always given me the answer I need, is like, how would someone without OCD act about this? Yes, a normal person wouldn't want the fear. Sorry, I don't mean to say normal like we're abnormal, but just like a person without OCD. How would they react to the worry that we have? Like, oh, I hope I'm not capable of killing someone. They'd be like, that was a weird thought. And they wouldn't obsess over it. So that's what we're aiming for, is that we're aiming to respond to stuff in the same way as them. But because they don't have OCD, they don't need to work on breaking down that worst case fear, whereas we do, because we need to have the same rational. Oh my gosh, I just had an absolute, there's a cat in my window, like it's just there, like looking at me. Do you want to see? Can you see him? He just turned up. Where is he? No. Okay, you totally can't see him. That was a waste of time. But there is, that really, really shocked me. There's always something that happens on these videos. So I just showed you my washing, but there is a massive tabby cat just like at my window like this, like watching me. And it really just shocked me. I felt like there was a person there. Anyway, what was I talking about? It's completely thrown me off, that cat. So, yeah. Like, this is ridiculous. Moving towards the fear we were talking about and the uncertainty of the situation. And yeah, so what we need to do is be at peace with whatever life throws at us. Not, I'm at complete peace if I get cancer and die. That's not what we're doing. We're getting at peace with whatever life is going to throw is going to happen anyway. And me living my life completely trying to control every element of life isn't actually going to make that more or less likely to happen. And I definitely don't want it to happen, but I'm going to form a more rational response to the fear like a person without OCD would have. And that has been game changing for me. I want to reiterate that thinking about things more rationally, not fearing worst case scenarios, working on unconditional self and life acceptance, i.e. whatever life wants to throw at me, I'm game. That definitely isn't, anytime I get scared, I compulsively tell myself. It's definitely a gradual belief shift. So a lot of my fears unlocked really quickly with unconditional self and life acceptance. I would suggest that if you think of one that doesn't bother you that much and apply the idea of unconditional self and life acceptance, you'll see that it does work a lot quicker. Or even if you think of something that doesn't actually scare you, like being unwell. I'm not scared of being unwell. I don't have health OCD. I've never had it. And I have a rational, my brain responds the same way as someone without OCD. So I can see, you know, like when you've spoken to peers about OCD and they have a fear and you're like, how could you be scared of that? That's just nowhere near as scary as mine. Well, that's how they feel about yours. And it's also how people without OCD feel about your theme or your fear or my fear. And that's what we're aiming for. So we know that what we're scared of isn't universally scary because not everyone's scared of it. But our brain has latched to it for some reason. It's developed proof as to why this is something to be scared of. We need to unpick that in a healthy way that isn't compulsive and isn't obsessing over individual thoughts. So zooming out from the individual instances and thoughts, why am I checking this? Why am I looking at that? What am I scared of? Working out with some therapy, you know, what is the core fear here? And then working on breaking down that. And so definitely moving towards fear, not chasing the feeling of relief. So I often was so desperate to get the feeling of safety, of relief, that I would be like doing anything I could to keep checking and making sure I was safe. And that's because I didn't want the event I was at to be ruined. So if I went to a party I was so desperate to have fun because I love having fun and I love when things are fun. And it's like such a shame, isn't it, when you've got ready and you're like really excited and you're with your friends and then it's just ruined. But re-evaluating our life philosophy and life perspectives, that where is it written down as a law universally that everything has to be fun, that life should be easy, should be simple? Where's that written down? That's no law. There's no law. Like, where is it written down that you shouldn't have OCD? Why? What about things that are much worse than that? What about if you literally were paralyzed, you couldn't even go to the event at all? Surely being there in some capacity is better than not at all. And if the chances are you'll have fun, great, but sometimes maybe you won't. So releasing that rigidity around, I don't want to ruin this event, is super helpful too. So then you don't feel compelled to do the checking because you're like, if I happen to see something that triggers me and then I don't really enjoy this event very much, that's going to be okay. I don't really want that, but I can live with that reality because I have been at events a million times before where OCD has taken over. And actually, it could be pretty good practice for me to be in a situation where I'm highly triggered, but I'm at the event anyway and I'm not engaging in the checking compulsions. So, in summary, I know how addictive it can feel and I know how it can feel automatic. The way to reduce the automatic feeling for me was to work on those underlying core fears so that I didn't feel compelled to check as much. And I did treat it a bit like an addiction, in that it was like, if I give in, then I've given into my addiction, which obviously is like only terminology, is not exactly the same. If you have any questions about this, please comment below and like the video if you liked it. Obviously subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos from me. And I hope this has been useful for you today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.